The diplomatic breakfast aboard the Zenith Accord was supposed to be a carefully orchestrated display of interspecies cooperation. Ambassador Kretok of the Vaxillian Confederation had spent 3 cycles preparing the menu, ensuring every species' dietary requirements were met with precision. The crystalline beings from Sector 7 received their photon-infused nectar, the methane breathers from the outer rim had their pressurized chambers, and the humans had requested something called pancakes. Dr. Marla Kovac, humanities representative, sat at the long obsidian table with her 7-year-old daughter, Sadie. The child's presence had been controversial. Several ambassadors questioned the propriety of bringing offspring to such an important negotiation. But Marla had been firm. Human children were not left behind. Where humans went, their young followed. Beside Sadie sat Zixlar, the Vaxillian ambassador's youngling, a small, scaled creature with 6 eyes and a curious disposition. The two had bonded instantly when the delegation arrived, much to everyone's surprise. The preliminary trade agreements look promising, Kretok chittered, his translator rendering his clicks into standard. However, we must address the territorial concerns in the Andromeda Appendix. Marla nodded, reaching for her coffee. She glanced at Sadie, who was coloring on a datapad while Zixlar watched with fascination. The little Vaxillian had never seen such primitive artistic expression. Admiral Thundra, the massive Korthian military commander, grumbled something about resource allocation. His species stood 8 feet tall, covered in armored plating that had evolved to withstand plasma fire. They were warriors, conquerors, and they viewed humans with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "Where are the younglings?" Kretok suddenly chirped, his antennae twitching with alarm. Marla's head snapped around. Both chairs were empty. "Zixlar!" Kretok's voice rose to a panicked frequency that made everyone's translators crackle. The room erupted. Vaxillian security guards activated their scanning devices. Korthian soldiers moved to seal the exits. The crystalline delegates began vibrating at distress frequencies, creating a dissonant hum that filled the chamber. "Everyone calm down," Marla said, though her own heart was racing. She stood, scanning the vast breakfast hall. The room was designed for beings of various sizes. Some chairs floated, others were embedded in the floor. There were alcoves, viewing ports, and a small giggle echoed from somewhere below. Marla dropped to her knees and looked under the table. There, in the shadowy space between the table's ornate legs, sat Sadie and Zixlar. They were huddled together over something, their heads nearly touching. "Sadie Marie Kovac, what are you doing under there?" "Shh, Mom, you'll scare him." Sadie's voice was barely a whisper. "Scare who?" Marla crawled under the table, an undignified position for a human ambassador, but maternal instinct trumped protocol. As her eyes adjusted to the dimness, she saw what held the children's attention. A small creature, no bigger than a house cat, sat between them. It had iridescent fur that shifted colors in the low light, large eyes that held surprising intelligence, and tiny paws that clutched a piece of Sadie's breakfast waffle. "Is that a singing moth of Epsilon Prime?" Marla breathed. Sadie nodded solemnly. "He was hungry, Mom. Everyone up there is eating, but nobody noticed him, so we came down here to share." Zixlar chirped softly, and Marla's translator rendered it. "The small one was frightened. Too many big ones. Sadie said we make safe space." The singing moth was a rare, endangered species, highly intelligent, highly sought after by collectors, and extremely skittish around large gatherings. They were known to stow away on ships, drawn by the vibrations of different species' voices, which they could mimic with haunting accuracy. Above them, Marla could hear the chaos continuing. Kretok was demanding a deck-by-deck search. Admiral Thundra was suggesting combat protocols. "Found them!" Marla called out, though she made no move to emerge just yet. Kretok's face appeared at the table's edge, his scales flushed with relief and embarrassment. "Are they unharmed?" Is Zixalar? They're fine, Marla said. They're sharing a snack. One by one, the various ambassadors and delegates crouched or bent or lowered themselves to peer under the table. It was an absurd sight, the galaxy's most powerful beings, hunched awkwardly to see two children and a small, glowing creature peacefully eating waffle pieces. The singing moth looked up at the circle of enormous faces and began to trill, a sound so pure and beautiful that even the translators couldn't process it. It was the moth's natural song, expressing contentment and trust. Admiral Thundra, whose species had never shown emotion in any official record, made a sound suspiciously like a chuckle. The younglings created a sanctuary. Under a breakfast table, added one of the crystalline delegates, their harmonic voice tinged with amusement. Kretok settled onto the floor, pulling himself partially under the table. Zixalar, you gave your portion to another? The youngling nodded. Sadie said, when scared, share food. Makes friends. Is this a human custom? Kretok asked Marla. Marla smiled. One of our oldest. Break bread together, and enemies become allies. The rest of the breakfast was reorganized. Everyone moved to the floor, sitting in a loose circle. The chef, a bemused Plutonian, brought out dishes that could be shared family style. The singing moth, still nestled between Sadie and Zixalar, chirped contentedly as various ambassadors took turns offering it tiny morsels. The trade negotiations that followed were the smoothest in Galactic Council history. Territorial disputes were resolved with unexpected ease. Resource allocations became collaborative rather than competitive. And when the Korthian Empire proposed a mutual defense pact with humanity, something previously unthinkable, Admiral Thundra's reasoning was simple. Any species whose young instinctively create safe spaces for the frightened and hungry, those are allies worth having. As the Zenith Accord prepared to depart, Marla found Kretok standing at an observation deck, Zixalar asleep in a carrying pouch on his chest. Your Sadie taught my youngling something today, he said quietly. Something we had forgotten in all our cycles of diplomacy and negotiation. What's that? That the most important agreements aren't signed at tables. They're made underneath them, where the scared and small find courage together. Marla looked out at the stars, thinking of all the human children throughout history who had done exactly that. Found friendship in unexpected places, built bridges where adults saw only walls. Yeah, she said softly. Kids have a way of cutting through the bullshit. Kretok's translator struggled with the idiom, but his laughter needed no translation at all.